this Dharma talk in the can for about a year because it wasn't time yet. I'm waiting for the video to switch. It wasn't time yet. I was waiting for an event to occur before I brought this to you, so it would be timely. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is last Sunday, somebody came to me and said that our service sometimes doesn't sound like traditional Buddhism that they're used to hearing. And there's a couple reasons for that. Thank goodness, my slide just came up. One reason is, it's a very complicated issue. One reason is the books in Barnes & Noble kind of present a certain perspective of Buddhism. It's not wrong, but it's kind of a certain perspective. Tends to be the perspective that resonates with Western people. It's called concept matching. Things that we recognize, we emphasize. It's also called confirmation bias. You only notice things that you recognize. So that's why today I had us read the Four Noble Truths. So I hope if that person's here, she'll go, hey, that sounded like Buddhism that I've read in books. The other reason why sometimes it doesn't sound like traditional Buddhism is different countries have different ways of expressing Buddhism. And so, we're a Japanese Buddhist tradition. And when Shinran talks, I find him confusing too. A lot of times I don't know what he's talking about. And it's a little frustrating. But Reverend Uno at our fall Ohigan said that one thing Shinran did, I knew Shinran always spoke very personably and from the heart. It's almost a confessional when he writes. So it makes it hard for me to relate because he's expressing his own personal depth and understanding. But Reverend Uno also said, and he said a lot of artists do this, John Lennon does it, he created his own vocabulary. And so it does sound different because it's a unique, he had the language of his time, the words and adjectives just weren't up to the job. And so he created his own way of explaining the Dharma. So it is very unique and different. So this is one of the quotes from Shinran that I've had a lot of trouble with. He says that the teachings are for the sake of myself alone. He says that. It's one of his very famous quotes. And it always sounded a little selfish to me, like all of Buddhism is just for me. But sometimes I feel like that. I feel like, we had our 50th anniversary. I feel like every founder, the temple, everybody that sustained the tradition was waiting for me to find OCBC on the internet. You know what I mean? I do feel like that. I feel like it was a beacon waiting for me to find it. And it's because I think what happens is the teachings become very personal. They're not in the abstract, and they're not conceptual. So I think that's what Shinran's saying. It's as if the Buddha was speaking directly to his heart. So that's my intro. So I haven't done a Dharma talk for children lately, but this is supposed to be more child-friendly. So there's a new movie coming out soon, which is what I was waiting for. I've waited patiently for a year. This is Emily Blunt. Do you know who this is? Anyone guess? Yes. This is Emily Blunt. She's going to be in Mary Poppins, and I've been waiting. I kept tracking the release date. So this is pretty amazing, isn't it? So that's Julie Andrews on the left, and that's Emily Blunt on the right. And it was supposed to be released on Christmas Day, 2018, but I went on the internet because I want my Dharma talks to be factually accurate. I don't want to give you bad information. It's actually coming out on December 19th. That's the latest thing. So come holiday time, there's going to be a sequel for Mary Poppins. So that's the original movie poster. This is the new one. It sounds like a horror film. Mary Poppins Returns. It's a little scary. So I grew up, the original Mary Poppins came out in 1964. I was born 20 years later. No, I'm kidding. I was 4 years old in 1964. And I went and saw this with my family, the original Mary Poppins. And there was, this is Mrs. Banks, there's Mr. Banks. I had to look it up. Their kids are Jane and Michael. And Jane and Michael are presented in the beginning of the movie as being precocious, rambunctious, naughty. They're not following the rules. And Mr. Banks is a banker, of course. And I've told you they do that kind of thing on purpose. The character names usually signal to you the personality of the character. There was a book by Ernest Hemingway, and a lot of times in his books, he didn't have a high opinion of women in a lot of his books. And one of the women's name was Muriel, because like a mural, she was all superficial, wore a lot of makeup. She was a mural. She had no depth. So that happens a lot, even in our sutras. The names are given to kind of give away foreshadow the story. So Mr. Banks is really serious. He's working 80-hour weeks. He wants to be a senior VP. He's not very loving or warm at home. And in his mind, the reason why he's having troubles is his kids won't behave. So in this scene, the kids go out to fly a kite, and he doesn't know where they are, and he's angry, and he calls the police. And the police bring the kids back, and the policeman is very understanding. You know, they're just kids playing after school, but Mr. Banks is very angry.
I should like you to send a policeman round immediately.
The policeman's here, George.
What? Oh, how very prompt. What wonderful service. Thank you so much. Good night. Come in, Constable, come in.
Thank you, sir. While going about my duties on the other side of the park, I noted some valuables that had gone astray. I believe they're yours, sir.
Valuables?
Come along now, come along.
Jane. Michael.
Winifred, please don't be emotional.
Oh, I wouldn't be too hard on them, sir. They've had a long, weary walk today.
Children, come here at once. Well?
I'm sorry we lost Katie and Anna, Father. You see, it was windy, and the kite was too strong for us.
In a manner of speaking, sir, it was the kite that ran away, not the children.
Thank you, Constable. I think I can manage this.
So the policeman's like, really? You're gonna... So it's kind of, when I watched this film, I kind of realized he called the police on his kids. So he is very upset, very angry, and he decides to get them a nanny. And I guess they've gone through a bunch of nannies. I guess, they drove the nannies crazy and they resigned. So he's looking for a nanny to get control of these children. So Julie Andrews arrives in a magical way, and she starts to change the household. She encourages Mr. Banks that he really should take the kids to the bank, to his work. And he thinks it's an okay idea, and Mary Poppins is very forceful. And I guess the kids misbehave. There's a scene at the teller's window, and ultimately, Mr. Banks gets fired from his job. And so in this scene, he tells Dick Van Dyke, who's Bert, and I always thought that Bert and Mary Poppins had a thing. I mean, I really thought they were going to date and get married. So there was a lot of chemistry there, I thought. So Mr. Banks tells Bert that Mary Poppins is sabotaging his family, and it was her fault that he got in trouble at the bank, and she was the one that made me take the kids. And Bert's like, oh, what? She's so mean. She made you hang out with your kids. Well, that's despicable. And then he breaks into song, but I'm clipping it at the song because I've only got 10 more minutes. So, he's kind of calling out Mr. Banks' ego. He's too important to hang out with his own children. And he begins to get the message. So now it's kind of a parallel scene. Rather than Mr. Banks on the phone looking for his kids, the police officer's now on the phone looking for Mr. Banks. He gets fired from his job, but it turns his whole life around. He's saved.
He's been found, now alive.
Well, so I presume he's a kissing of Mrs. Banks.
I've been so worried. What happened at the bank?
I've been sacked, discharged, flagged to the street. A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Gone off his crumpet. That's what he's done. Dotty as you please.
George, what on earth were you doing in the cellar?
We'll see in a moment. Where are the children? Jane! Michael!
Your father's calling you.
It doesn't sound right, Father.
Jane! Michael!
Run along, Spitspot.
You won't go, Mary Poppins, will you?
Spitspot.
So the father has had a total turnaround. He wants to go fly kites and play now. And so I always had the feeling that she saved the dad, not the kids. I always had this vague sense that it's not really about the children. I kind of had a feeling that maybe Mary Poppins came to save Mr. Banks. And the sad thing is Mary Poppins has to go now because she's accomplished her job and her mission. And Linda always says spit spot when I clean the kitchen. Spit spot, spit spot. So I wanted to share this with you. The woman that wrote Mary Poppins, her name was P.L. Travers. That was her pen name. Like Mark Twain was really Samuel Clemens. So her nom de plume is P.L. Travers. Her real name was Helen Goff. And her father was Travis Goff. So she took her father's first name as her pen name. And her father was an alcoholic. She loved him dearly, but he died of alcoholism. She had a lot of conflicted feelings about her father. So this movie came out in 2013, also at the holiday time. And I think on Christmas Day, Linda and I and Emily and her boyfriend and my mom, and maybe Teague, I can't remember, and Taylor, we went to go see Saving Mr. Banks. So, this is a movie about the making of Mary Poppins and the saving of Mr. Banks. Emma Thomas is P.L. Travers, and Tom Hanks is Walt Disney. And I went and saw this movie, and the ending of it, Walt Disney meets with P.L. Travers. He wants the book really bad. He wants to make Mary Poppins for 1964, and she won't let him have the rights because it's a very precious story. She doesn't trust him to do a good job, and she's afraid that Disney's going to turn it into this Snow White and Seven Dwarfs cartoon movie, right? And this was like one of the first major live-action films of Disney, so she didn't really trust him. And I saw this scene in the theater. It reminded me a bit of my father. I started crying really bad in the theater, and I was sitting next to Emily's boyfriend. And I was like, this is bad. This is really bad. He's sitting right next to me, and I'm like, Mary Poppins. And like, I'm going to get all welled up now. Walt Disney comes to her, and he says, the whole story is about the father. It's not about the kids. The whole story is written by P.L. Travers. She's writing about her own father, about saving her own father. So this scene, I think, is just wonderful.
It's not the children she comes to save. It's their father. It's your father. Travers Goff.
I don't know what you think you know about me, Walter.
You must have loved and admired him a lot to take his name. It's him this is all about, isn't it? All of it, everything. Forgiveness, Mrs. Travers. It's what I learned from your books.
I don't have to forgive my father. He was a wonderful man.
No. You need to forgive Helen Goff. Life is a harsh sentence to lay down for yourself.
So she gives him the rights to this book because of this dialogue they have And he says that in every movie house across the country, everybody will worship your father. They'll see Mr. Banks redeemed and saved and liberated and celebrated forever. And so this is a healing, transformative event for her. She finally lets go of the anguish, and she forgives both herself and her father. So this, these stories, they seem like children's stories, but these are profound messages, emotional truth by the author. And you have to watch movies very closely. They're storyboarded. I didn't realize it until I clipped it, but you have him calling the police on the phone looking for his kids, and then you have the police on the phone searching for the father, wanting to go fly a kite. And they go sing that song, "Let's Go Fly a Kite." The father's a totally different person by the end of the film. So I wanted to show you this. This is out of the collected works by Shinran Shonen. It's those two giant white books. The quote down here at the bottom is where Shinran says he doesn't know anything about good or evil, and the only thing that's important in life is the Nembutsu. And I took that and I did a talk with All You Need Is Love by John Lennon. Like, the only important thing in John Lennon's life was compassion and connectivity to other human beings. Similar the way Shinran thinks about Namo Amida Butsu. And then up here in bright pink, I actually started as Mary Poppins saving Mr. Banks. So this is Shinran speaking. When I consider deeply the vow of Amida, which arose from 5 kalpas of profound thought, I realized that it was entirely for the sake of myself alone. So when I saw that Saving Mr. Banks movie, I really thought this was an excellent example of this emotional truth that Shinran's trying to express, right? So when we come to church, like maybe I started out coming to church with my kids so they could have a spiritual background and training in their life. But over time, you realize that Buddhism's for you, right? The message has always been for you, and it transforms your life. And so I hope over time you have this feeling where it's very personal, it's no longer abstract, and it's no longer conceptual. The Buddhism is about your salvation alone. And so I think when that new sequel comes out for Mary Poppins Returns, I think she should say, "In a world where men are grumpy at work, now it's personal." All trailers sound like that. So what I try to do is I try to find examples in our everyday culture that helps the teaching resonate with me. And so if you watch Mary Poppins, and then you watch Saving Mr. Banks, and hopefully when you see Mary Poppins Returns, it all fits together. There's a profound message in these stories. And whether P.L. Travers knew it or not, she was working out her feelings for her father by having Mary Poppins come and save Mr. Banks, just like she'd always wished that her own father could have been saved. And in a sense, he's saved when she sees him through different eyes. So in that sense, she was able to save her father by looking at him from a different perspective and seeing him warts and all, and maybe not just focusing on the drinking, but everything else that he did in his life to support her. His early death is still tragic, but he still lives within her heart, and that relationship she built with him as a child still exists. And I thought Walt Disney was amazingly intuitive to be able to pick up on that and have that dialogue with her and actually give her an avenue to share her pain with the world and be able to transcend those feelings she had. And maybe she wasn't even aware of it. And this happens a lot with artists. There's something they're trying to get out, but a lot of times they don't even know exactly what it is. And so I would say the larger sutra is the same way. You read that as a myth and a story, but it's really telling the spiritual journey of your own life. And there's a famous Buddhist scholar named Roijin Sogen. He said that when you read Buddhist texts, it should be as if you're reading your own life story. You're reading your own personal diary. It's as if you wrote it. It's speaking to you, individual, very personal. And that's how he said we should read Buddhist texts and watch movies. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amidavats. Namandavats. 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 Thank you very much.